Alrighty.
So how you feeling?
Yeah, I feel good, man. It's day one.
Greetings, Sentinels. This is Universe Unique, and today, the truth comes to light. For decades, Spider-Man fans have passionately debated his romances, but there's an uncomfortable truth. For every love interest that elevated Peter Parker, there was another that nearly ruined his journey on the big screen. The most beloved and the most hated, side by side, reveal far more about the character than you might think. And there's a twist in all of this that most people haven't noticed yet. Before we dive into this analysis, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We're about to hit a historic milestone, and your support makes all the difference for this community to grow and continue delivering the sharpest analyses and theories in nerd culture. By subscribing, you don't just strengthen the channel, you guarantee that you'll always have content that keeps you ahead in geek discussions. Now tell me, where are you watching this video from? Which country and city? I want to see the strength of this community spread around the world, and I'll read every single comment. If this content is connecting you with the hottest news and theories in the nerd universe, go for the triple kill: like, comment, and share. Now let's start with the most controversial of all, Sam Raimi's Mary Jane, and the reason she became the most hated love interest in Spider-Man's cinematic history. Mary Jane Watson has always been one of the pillars of Spider-Man's universe. In the comics, she makes her entrance with the iconic line, "Face it, Tiger. You just hit the jackpot," symbolizing that magnetic, fearless woman who not only understands Peter Parker, but stands by him. This expectation was alive when Sam Raimi brought Kirsten Dunst's version to the screen. The audience wanted to see the force of nature that Stan Lee and John Romita created in the 1960s. But what we saw on screen was very different. Throughout the trilogy, this version of Mary Jane became one of the most frustrating elements for fans. Instead of the vibrant, confident partner who could confront both Peter and Spider-Man head-on, we got a character constantly trapped in romantic dilemmas, unclear in her choices, and often inconsistent. In the first film, she's torn between Harry Osborn and Peter while trying to establish herself as an actress, but never truly achieves the independence her comic book counterpart had. It felt like she never took control of her own life. This narrative weakness became even clearer in Spider-Man 2. Mary Jane gets involved with John Jameson, even gets engaged, yet still shows unresolved feelings for Peter. The contrast between Peter's sacrifices as a hero and the way she reacts to his absences annoyed many fans. A classic example is when Peter misses her theater performance because he's out saving lives. And yet, she treats him as if he simply didn't care. That scene became the symbol of a larger issue. MJ seemed more fascinated by the image of Spider-Man than by the man behind the mask. By the third film, the problem peaked. Manipulated by Harry, she breaks up with Peter without giving him space for dialogue, throwing him into an emotional spiral that shapes the entire narrative. Instead of being a partner who strengthened him, she became an obstacle. And that turned her into one of the most controversial characters in superhero cinema. While some argue that her flaws made her more human, most of the fandom never forgave it. They expected a Mary Jane true to the spirit of the comics, but instead got an inconsistent version that never lived up to the weight her name carries. And all of this leads to a tough question. Was this Mary Jane simply poorly adapted? Or was the real problem in the way Raimi's trilogy itself was designed, choosing to lean into melodrama instead of a heroic partnership? That question became central to the debate, and the answer completely changes how we view those films even today. To understand why this MJ ended up remembered as the most hated, we need to focus on one particular detail in Spider-Man 2. A moment that crystallized the audience's frustration and permanently defined this version of the character. The turning point that sealed the rejection of Kirsten Dunst's Mary Jane came in Spider-Man 2. Peter is late to her theater performance because he's out saving lives as Spider-Man. To the audience, the situation is crystal clear. He's fulfilling his heroic duty, risking his own life. Yet when he finally shows up, Mary Jane treats him as if he simply doesn't care. That scene, meant to highlight a human dilemma, instead came across as the script ignoring the weight of Peter's choices. It was the moment many fans realized this version of MJ didn't work as a narrative partner, but as an emotional antagonist. The issue wasn't just her demands in moments like this, but her lack of consistency throughout the trilogy. Instead of growing, she seemed stuck in the same cycle, seeking from Peter what others couldn't give. But when he gave himself fully, she hesitated, pulled back, or changed course. This constant back and forth didn't just wear out their chemistry, it created fatigue. Unlike the MJ from the comics, who often served as a point of stability amid chaos, this version became a source of instability that trapped Peter in personal drama. Some critics defended the portrayal as a reflection of a realistic character, with insecurities, flaws, and questionable choices. But when the narrative doesn't balance those weaknesses with moments of genuine strength, the result is only frustration. In the comics, Mary Jane has insecurities, but she also has iconic moments of courage and independence. In Amazing Spider-Man The Break 259, for example, she reveals the burden of her difficult family life to Peter without losing her determination. On film, that kind of nuance was lost, replaced by love triangles and broken trust. And there's another important detail. Raimi's trilogy never gave her an identity outside of her relationship with Peter. Unlike later versions that portrayed romances with balance and dual agency, this MJ existed almost entirely in reaction to the protagonist's decisions. As a result, instead of being remembered as a partner, she became a symbol of delay and emotional wear. This contrast became even sharper when a new version of Gwen Stacy arrived on screen, delivering exactly what Raimi's Mary Jane couldn't: presence, intelligence, and, above all, the feeling of standing by Peter, not against him. If Raimi's Mary Jane represented frustration for much of the audience, Emma Stone's Gwen Stacy showed the opposite. What happens when a romance is built with balance, depth, and real dramatic weight? From her very first appearance in The Amazing Spider-Man, Gwen radiates a rare naturalness. She isn't impressed by the costume or the hero's public persona. What draws her in is Peter Parker's vulnerability. That distinction was crucial because it shifted the focus to the human being behind the mask, not just the myth of Spider-Man. The chemistry between Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield was decisive. While their real-life relationship amplified it, the result on screen was undeniable. Every look, every exchange carried a spontaneity that made audiences believe in the couple. Unlike rushed romances, their connection developed organically. It wasn't just the old hero who can't reveal his identity trope. Gwen had her own life, her own goals, and refused to be defined solely as the protagonist's girlfriend. This trait aligned closely with the original Gwen from the 1960s comics, always portrayed as intelligent, determined, and emotionally present in Peter's life. But Emma Stone elevated it by making Gwen active in the story itself. In The Amazing Spider-Man 2, when Peter tries to push her away for her own safety, Gwen doesn't accept it passively. She confronts him, makes it clear no one decides her life for her, and insists on being part of the fight. That brought a rare maturity to superhero films, making her a partner rather than a side character. Another detail that reinforced this perception was how Gwen reacted to the weight of Peter's double life. Instead of demanding his presence in impossible situations, like Dunst's MJ, she understood the burden of being a hero and looked for ways to share it. That kind of partnership resonated strongly with fans because it finally felt like the relationship that made sense for Spider-Man, a love that strengthened him without ignoring the dangers around him. The impact was so strong that Emma Stone's Gwen Stacy is still remembered as the definitive love interest for the hero in cinema. And for that very reason, when it came time to portray her tragic fate, the shock was far greater than any other loss shown before in Spider-Man's adaptations. When The Amazing Spider-Man 2 hit theaters, everyone familiar with the comics already carried a weight in their hearts. Since 1973, in The Amazing Spider-Man number 121, Gwen Stacy's death had forever marked the hero's mythos. It was the moment innocence ended, and Peter Parker learned, in the cruelest way possible, that saving someone is not always within his reach. The film, therefore, carried more than just the responsibility of telling a story. it had to recreate one of the most iconic losses in comic book history. The movie took great care in building that bond. Every scene between Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone deepened the intimacy and connection of the couple. The narrative planted small victories and lighthearted exchanges precisely so the audience could relax before the blow. When the inevitable came, the pain was multiplied because it wasn't only the hero who suffered. The viewers felt as if they too had lost the most authentic relationship ever shown in a Spider-Man film. The falling sequence was cruelly precise. Visually, the scene mirrored the comics, from the tower to the abrupt impact that sealed her fate. In the comic, the controversy always revolved around the snap that suggested Peter's own web might have caused her death. In the film, Mark Webb echoed that ambiguity elegantly, leaving the audience torn between inevitable tragedy and the hero's silent guilt. That detail reinforced Spider-Man's essence, carrying burdens that never disappear. The result was devastating. While Dunst's MJ represented, for many, a narrative weight, Emma Stone's Gwen showed what it truly means to lose someone who genuinely enriched the hero's life. From that moment on, it wasn't just Peter failing to protect. It felt like the audience themselves had lost something irreplaceable. That dramatic power explains why, even today, fans call for Emma Stone's return in alternate multiverse storylines. This direct comparison between Gwen's fall and Raimi's MJ created an inevitable contrast. One was remembered for inconsistency, while the other became a symbol of legendary tragedy. But cinema didn't stop there. In the MCU, Marvel decided to take a very different path, offering a completely new kind of romance for Tom Holland's Peter Parker. With Spider-Man's arrival in the MCU, Marvel chose a fresh direction, portraying Peter Parker not only as a hero, but as a regular teenager still discovering himself. In this context, Liz Allen became the first major romantic interest for Tom Holland's version. Unlike earlier portrayals, this wasn't a mythical figure, or a looming tragedy, but rather the typical experience of a young man trying to balance school, friendships, and responsibilities far beyond his years. Liz is popular, intelligent, and approachable. She leads the decathlon team, and, unlike previous versions, doesn't treat Peter as a complete outsider. This narrative choice made sense because it brought to the screen a more grounded version of the hero, someone not yet overwhelmed by epic drama, but already feeling the weight of his double life. Whenever Peter had to abandon plans with Liz to save the day, his absence didn't feel like a trivial teenage issue. It was a glimpse of the sacrifices that would come to define him. The high point of this relationship, however, wasn't in its light-hearted beginning, but in the shocking twist of Spider-Man: Homecoming. When Peter goes to pick Liz up for the dance, and Adrian Toomes, the Vulture, opens the door as her father, the film delivered one of the MCU's most unexpected turns. That revelation flipped the logic of the teen romance and wove it into the central conflict of the story. The tense car ride, with Toomes slowly piecing things together, became one of the most praised sequences in Holland's early run. The end of this arc also avoided cliches. Liz wasn't written out over petty teenage drama, but because her entire life was upended after her father's arrest. This narrative decision reinforced a theme present since Stan Lee's comics. Peter's relationships always suffer from the consequences of his heroic world, even when he tries to protect those he loves. This first MCU romance didn't have the emotional depth of Gwen Stacy, but it served its purpose, to show that, even when he looks like just another teenager, Peter Parker can never live a normal life. And that lesson set the stage for a new kind of love interest, one who would become the most unique and impactful MJ on film. When Zendaya appeared in Spider-Man: Homecoming, few imagined her character, initially introduced as Michelle Jones, would become the MCU's new MJ. Unlike previous versions, she didn't arrive as an immediate romantic lead. Her presence was understated, marked by sarcasm, dry humor, and a sharp eye that seemed to see through the social masks around her. This was a surprise, as it broke the tradition of the unattainable girl and offered something more grounded in the reality of modern teenagers. The relationship between Peter and MJ in the MCU was built slowly, deliberately, and through subtle gestures. Unlike the Raimi and Webb versions, there were no grand declarations or sudden sparks of passion. Instead, it was exchanged glances, quiet remarks, and a gradual discovery of common ground. This approach made the couple's evolution feel more natural and believable. When they finally kissed in Far From Home, it wasn't a dramatic climax, but a shy, almost awkward moment. Exactly the kind of experience that connected audiences to Peter's youth. Another key element is that Zendaya's MJ refused to be swallowed by the hero's narrative. From the start, she demonstrated agency, a critical perspective on the world and on Peter himself, closer in spirit to Emma Stone's Gwen than to Kirsten Dunst's Mary Jane. In No Way Home, this was even more apparent. Alongside Ned, she actively participated in decisions and confronted threats head-on, never just a damsel in distress. This matched what fans had long asked for. Relationships that don't merely orbit Peter, but add to his journey. The resolution in No Way Home pushed that development to its emotional limit. When Peter chooses to erase himself from everyone's memory to protect those he loves, his silent farewell with MJ is heartbreaking. There are no big speeches, just the absence of words, the glances, and the restrained pain. That moment cemented Zendaya's MJ as a standout in Spider-Man's cinematic history. The first romance that, even when cut short, felt real, earned, and full of humanity. This reinvention of MJ proved Marvel understood what was at stake. It wasn't about recycling formulas, but about creating something that resonated with a new generation. In doing so, she became not only accepted, but widely celebrated as one of the best versions of Peter Parker's partner on screen. Not every Spider-Man love interest has had the chance to develop, and perhaps the biggest example is Felicia Hardy in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Played by Felicity Jones, the character appears only as Harry Osborn's assistant, with no narrative weight, no connection to Peter, and no hint of her comic book identity as Black Cat. It was a wasted opportunity. In the comics, Felicia is one of Peter's most complex figures, a thief, occasional ally, and often a love interest who forces the hero into moral dilemmas. On film, however, she was reduced to an empty nod, a casualty of a script more concerned with setting up spin-offs than with building solid characters. The contrast is even clearer when looking at Gwen Stacy in Spider-Man 3, played by Bryce Dallas Howard. Though she had limited screen time, her presence stood out. Unlike Dunst's MJ, Gwen was portrayed as kind, graceful, and genuinely good. She wasn't there to replace Mary Jane, but to serve as a counterpoint, highlighting how far Peter was drifting from himself. Her public kiss with Spider-Man and her presence during the disastrous jazz club sequence were narrative triggers for Peter's conflict with MJ. Yet even amid the chaos of the film, Gwen emerged with more dignity than the leads. One of the most discussed moments is precisely that jazz club scene. Consumed by the symbiote, Peter uses Gwen to provoke Mary Jane, flaunting his arrogance in front of the woman he loved. Gwen, unaware of being used, participates innocently in the dance. When she realizes what happened, she apologizes to MJ. That simple yet powerful gesture cemented her image as an honorable, respectful character, even in one of Spider-Man's most criticized movies. These two portrayals, one wasted, the other surprisingly effective, show how the writing of a love interest can determine their relevance. Felicia Hardy, who could have been a game changer, was forgotten. Gwen, even within one of the hero's weakest films, earned unexpected sympathy from audiences. This contrast opens the door to a bigger reflection. What truly defines whether a romance in Spider-Man's universe strengthens the story or weakens it? When looking at each of Spider-Man's love interests on the big screen, one pattern is impossible to ignore. Their impact is never neutral. They either act as a source of balance for Peter Parker, or as a weight that drags him deeper into chaos. This duality is an essential part of the character's mythology, reflecting the central dilemma of his life. Being a hero, while still trying to live something that resembles normalcy. In Raimi's films, Mary Jane ended up representing more weakness than support, largely due to script choices that portrayed her as indecisive and far removed from the strength of her comic book counterpart. Emma Stone's Gwen Stacy showed the exact opposite. an active, engaged partner who elevated Peter in every decision, which made her death all the more devastating. In the MCU, Liz Allen symbolized the life Peter wished he could have, but could never sustain, while Zendaya's MJ offered a modern reinvention of the myth, built on authenticity and mutual trust. In the comics, this dynamic has always been clear as well. Gwen represented innocence and tragedy. Mary Jane, growth and resilience. At her best, MJ was the safe harbor Peter desperately needed after Gwen's death. But when poorly adapted, as seen in Raimi's films, she lost her brilliance and turned into an obstacle. Felicia Hardy, on the other hand, brought a different layer. Not the ideal partner, but the temptation of a life outside the rules, forcing Peter to confront his own limits. This pattern reveals something essential. Each of Spider-Man's romances isn't just a love story, but a direct reflection of the stage of life Peter Parker is in. When the relationship is healthy, Peter grows and finds balance. When it is poorly built or marked by instability, it exposes the hero's flaws and contradictions. That's why these love interests divide fans so deeply. At the core, they're not just judging the characters, but how much each one helped or hindered Peter Parker's journey. And it's precisely this constant shift between support and weakness that leaves one inevitable question. In the next chapter of Spider-Man's cinematic story, will we see the return of a classic figure, perhaps even the most controversial of them all? Or will Marvel continue reinventing the pattern with a new approach? After reviewing every version, it's clear that Spider-Man's romantic journey on film is almost as complex as his battles against villains. On one side, Raimi's Mary Jane, who became a symbol of disappointment for never meeting the emotional weight fans expected. On the other, Emma Stone's Gwen Stacy, remembered as the ideal partner, whose death became one of the greatest tragedies ever seen in superhero adaptations. In between, we had notable experiences like Liz Allen in the MCU, who embodied the conflict between a normal life and a heroic life, and Zendaya's MJ, who brought a modern reinvention that won over audiences with authenticity. Even brief appearances, like Bryce Dallas Howard's Gwen, managed to leave a more positive impression than some versions with far more screen time. Ultimately, these romances reveal something bigger. Each love interest isn't just part of a romantic subplot, but a reflection of Peter Parker himself. Audiences don't simply love or hate the characters, they respond to what those characters represent within the hero's evolution. When love serves as support, the story grows stronger. When it turns into an obstacle, the weight falls not only on Peter, but on the entire narrative. That's why this debate never ends and always returns with force in every new adaptation. Now I want to hear from you. Who was Peter Parker's true love on the big screen? Who do you think was the best partner? And which one should never have existed? Write it down in the comments, and also let me know where you're watching from, your city, or even your country. I want to see the strength of this community spread across the world. And if this deep dive into Spider-Man's history connected you with the sharpest analyses in geek culture, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We're about to reach an important milestone, and your support is essential for this community to keep growing. By subscribing, you guarantee that you'll always stay on top of the theories, insights, and breakdowns that make all the difference in fan conversations.